When we think about the Roaring 1920s, we often think of the flapper, right? The women in those narrow costumes. There's images of the flappers in the Crash Course video, and it's really a totally different look and attitude for American women. And I want to put into context this idea of who these women were. They were considered the new woman, right? Right? The new woman, the professional women, active, young, sporty, all of these things about this modern woman of the 1920s. But keep in mind this idea that the professions for women were still limited. They were greatly limited to those feminine fields, education, social work, nursing, those very much those helping professions. Most of the women who worked in the United States were either working class workers, women of color, immigrant women, middle class white women, and upper class white women. Most often did not work. Sometimes they worked before they were married, before they had children, but they often did not have paying jobs. We talked about those women of the progressive era. We talked about the growth of women's colleges in the progressive era. The Texas Women's University, of course, was created during this period of 1900. So you have these limits on what women can do in this period, but they really start to change. When World War I comes along, women were already pushing against those Victorian attitudes and Victorian ideals about who a woman could be and who she should be. You have the suffrage movement, which is very popular in this time. You have the temperance movement, huge issues for middle class women. The temperance, the fight against alcohol and for prohibition, was victorious with that 18th Amendment, which we've already talked about. But then the women's right to vote comes in 1920 as well with that 19th Amendment. So until the 19th Amendment, American women were not able to vote across the United States. You have a lot of individual states, particularly Western states, that had allowed women to have the right to vote. Some could vote in just local elections, some could vote in state, national elections. But this is a nationwide push that is going to allow women to vote. Now, of course, which women are going to be able to vote? This suffrage movement was active. White women, black women, Hispanic women, women of many races were a huge part of this suffrage movement. But of course, we know the reality is that some white women suffragists used race as a tool to try to push for white women to get the vote, right? You have white women suffragists saying, you must give white women the right to vote to counter the vote of all these immigrant men. These ignorant immigrant men was the tone that they used to counter the vote of black men. And so you've got to give white women the right to vote. So we have to recognize that reality that there was some racism in some of those women suffragists of the time. But you also have a lot of black women who are advocating for the vote. And of course, when this 19th Amendment comes forward in 1920 and is finally ratified and made a part of the Constitution, there are so many laws in place that are limiting black voting. They are limiting through their Jim Crow laws, through the poll taxes, through the grandfather clauses throughout the South, especially, though in some northern cities as well. Again, we'll talk about this more in the 1950s, but this idea that women getting the right to vote didn't necessarily include all women, because many women of color were still going to be limited in their ability to vote. But this is an important date in the ability of American women to vote for sure. You do have a huge push for the right for women to use birth control. Margaret Sanger, of course, is the most famous proponent of this, but you have many others who are advocating for women to have the right to use birth control. Of course, it's going to be illegal for women to use birth control in this time period, and so you see a lot of women with 10, 12, 14 children. You see women, husbands who have multiple wives because their wives die in childbirth or die young, their first wives, because childbirth and childbearing is such a difficult thing and dangerous thing for so many women, especially in this earlier time period. The reality, and hopefully we'll get time to talk about it in the 1970s, is that it's illegal for married women to use birth control or to have access to birth control until the 1970s. And even in those cases, many of them have to ask permission, written permission from their husbands to gain access to birth control. So this is a very real issue, this idea of birth control, and it's very much a part of that 1920s women's movement that's going on. There's also another push in the 1920s. After the 19th Amendment was passed, there is a proposal for the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA. And the idea behind the Equal Rights Amendment was quite simply that people could not be discriminated against based on their gender. It's a very simple law, very simply written. It's going to be proposed every year from 1920 until today. It is passed in 1972, but never ratified. We'll talk about that when we get to the 1960s and 70s, but I just wanted to throw it here so that you could remember it when we talk about it later. Now to get back to the flapper, right? This idea of the flapper, this young woman, very boyish figure, which is very opposite of that kind of, they called it the Gibson girl, right? The very tight waist, corseted waist, large breasts, big hair, those images, kind of the Coca-Cola girls. It went from that to the flapper, and this image of, very boyish figure. Women would often bind their breasts, right? Try to make themselves as flat and boyish as possible to fit this image of the flapper. They wore shorter skirts. They put rouge on their cheeks, often smoking, which was very frowned upon at the time, with those big, long, fancy cigarettes, right? And it was just very, very different idea, this jewelry and makeup and smoking and drinking illegally. This very kind of fast girls kind of image, going for rides in cars and sitting in the rumble seat kind of thing. The reality is this was a very small group of women who did this and dressed this way, though all fashion changed. The hemlines came up for everyone. But these are going to be very young women, teens and such, late teens, early 20s. And it's often very temporary. Once they get married, it's going to fade very quickly, and that was really a very brief, very superficial phase for American women. But again, it's something that's so dramatically different from what came before that we often think of it. This period was American historians think of this period for women as a very superficial change, right? They got the right to vote, but not much came out of it, unfortunately. And I have a little bit more for you, but we'll pause there.